Right, so very good evening to you all. Welcome to the latest Corporate Leaders Chat here at Chatham House. This is on the record. The event is being recorded and videoed, so if you don't want to be recorded or videoed, you better dodge at the back or whatever. You're very welcome to tweet #CHEvents for this event, but do remember to put your phones on silent, so tweet silently if you're going to tweet. Welcome to these. It's been a great series of talks we've been doing sporadically, and I'm very pleased to welcome Christian Ulbrich here today, Chief Executive and President of JLL. Preparing for this event, I actually realized how little I know about JLL. I'd barely registered that Jones Lang LaSalle had changed its brand name to JLL. It's keeping the legal form. And I actually can be honestly, I hadn't realized how big it is. It's about 80,000. So I've seen different figures, 60 to 80,000 employees.
86.
86. Okay, so it's even gone up since I had a look. Revenue of about $7 billion. It has a market cap of about the same. I sort of hadn't clocked just what a sort of big concern it was, really. Christian took over there about 2 years ago. He's been working at the company since 2005, a background in banking in Germany. His time, I think it's fair to say, at JLL has coincided with a really interesting period in the evolution of our use of real estate. And if you're interested in shops and offices, the kind of stuff that we spend so much of our time occupying, and I should say I love all of this stuff. We're going to have a very good conversation here because that's bread and butter to the work that Christian does and JLL. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little about the company too. The usual format, I will chat to Christian for the first half, and then I'm going to throw open to you for questions, comments, anything you'd like to put to Christian as well. Actually, let's just start, if we could, on JLL. We hear a lot about the stress testing of banks. Central banks periodically love to, the Bank of England did one, you knock house prices down by a third and see where the UK banks would be. I mean, presumably JLL just rides up and down with the property cycle. Are you resilient if it all went very nasty? Are you comfortable? Do you lose sleep over that?
No, I'm not. Well, we are incredibly resilient, and I think the best argument to prove that is that our roots go back to 1760. And if we believe that the current state of the world is difficult, if you go back to 1760, there have been a lot of periods where the state of the world was quite difficult.
Right. And in terms of your sort of debt burden and your interest cover, all of those kinds of things, comfortable as you can be.
The beauty of a services business is that you usually have a relatively small balance sheet, and we also have a very small debt burden, as you call it. I mean, I'm probably more worried about the opposite, that our shareholders think we have too little debt and we could give them a special dividend or something like that. So.
Right. And now, in terms of your personal role, it was interesting. I couldn't actually say where you live or where you work.
Well, we would have that in common, but no. I mean, I'm living in Frankfurt privately, but in a global role, you are constantly on the road. So I'm currently on a 5-week trip. And so that, not that I don't see my family in between, but I won't sleep in my own bed. Right. And so we are always kind of trying to find places where we can meet. And so the fall break is coming in, so my little one who's still at school will be off, and so we meet somewhere, but you are constantly on the road.
But Chicago is the headquarters of the company.
Chicago is the headquarters, but we are not really a headquarter-minded company. We are truly a global business, and so last week we had our board of directors in Shanghai. This week I'm here because we had our global executive board meeting here. I'm off to the US. And so this is, we're constantly circling around the globe. That's where our clients are. That's where my most important stakeholders are, because the people working for JLL are my most important stakeholders. Right.
But you're multinational, because of course people would actually say property more than any other thing in the world at the moment is the one input to the productive process that actually has a real sense of place. I mean, property is the one thing that isn't mobile. Everything else is mobile. Property isn't. Capital, money, people, services, goods. Property is not mobile. Property has a real sense of place. So you do maintain if you like, you're a local business. It's that ghastly cliche. You're, in all your markets, you're local as well as global.
Yeah, we are absolutely local in all those markets, because we are not only servicing global clients, we are servicing a lot of local clients, and especially for those we have to be very local. But I think that is one of the big changes we have seen, because the role of property has changed dramatically for corporates. If you think about, just take an example of Apple. The Apple Store is delivering a brand message. It's delivering a promise about the product. And a company like Apple wants that Apple Store to look pretty much the same and come across the same across the world. Now, how do you deliver that if you are not working with a global service provider who makes that happen? And there are hundreds of examples of companies who have now identified property as a tool to deliver a brand message, or as a tool, if you are just having people working in offices, to deliver a message to your employees.
To the staff. It's an internal communication. Well, let's talk a bit about shops and offices. In this country, we're pretty far ahead, actually, on e-commerce. We're I think, above average in our sales. We've had a string of retail high street bankruptcies, stores that have been struggling. And a big question is, how does this process evolve? How does it play out? I mean, what happens to the physical property where these stores work? How far does this go? Nobody thinks that consumer retail spend will be 100% online, and no one thinks it's going to go down from where it is at sort of probably in the UK at 15 or so percent, I'd guess. Take me through the sort of the story of those traditional retail, bricks and mortar retail slots, and what happened.
Well, if you want to simplify that whole retail story, you have to think along the lines of convenience and experience. Going forward, this is how you have to cluster it. Either it is convenient or it's an experience. And so if it is more convenient for you to buy your stuff online with Amazon or whoever, then you will do that. If it is more convenient for you to pick up the goods on your way home from work or wherever you come from in a physical store, then that's what you're going to do. And that is the big change, that people want to have the choice and then decide on those spaces. If you want to have an experience, right, that's a completely different thing. If you have a beautiful high street where you want to kind of stroll along, have a coffee in between, and enjoy the experience, and while you have that experience, you're also shopping, that's a different story. And so I think the physical store and the shopping center have a really clear role to play, but they have to decide what they are. Are they convenient or are they an experience?
Right. And the shopping centres, the big malls, the Westfields, they're owned by a company. They have a boss who runs them and can make decisions about this is what we're putting here, this is what we're going to do here, this is the balance between food catering and food and beverage and retail space. The traditional high streets, and this is going to be true in the US, the rest of Europe and the UK, they don't have that. No one's in charge. They have some landlords here, they have some other landlords here. The council may have some role in the parking at the back and keeping the street clean. It's very hard for them, isn't it, to make good experience? And I wonder whether some of them will be convenient, some of them won't be convenient, and whether they are the ones that are really, really going to suffer.
Well, that's a very important point, and what you see in some countries and in some cities, that they kind of create what they have different names for it. Sometimes they call it business improvement districts, where the local community is trying to get the landlords together and they decide on what they are going to do to keep a street or an area competitive. And the challenge is always that you will always have kind of 10-15% of landlords who are kind of...
I don't want to pay for the Christmas decorations.
Exactly, I don't want to pay for it, and that is quite difficult. On the other hand, you have some great examples where those type of business improvement activities have really had an impact, and you could run a street almost like a shopping center, and that then creates value for those landlords. But it's tough, you know, that's one of the reasons why shopping centers tend to be so incredibly successful, because you have control.
Yeah. The other area which is sort of going through massive, well, there's a lot of talk about change, whether it's as big as the talk, I don't know, is the office sector. So how many people here have actually been into a WeWork facility in London? Quite a few of you, the slightly younger ones probably. So there's a lot of buzz around this. Co-working, basically renting a desk. Short leases is the other way. The companies, I don't know if we're only talking about this because of WeWork, which has reached a very high valuation and a lot of hype. But essentially they've taken a hospitality tradition and applied it to what might be a rather boring serviced office. And it is a much more pleasurable place to go into than the typical office, I would surmise. I think it's about 3 or 4% of the London office market. How high can it go, do you think?
Well, it is probably 20% of the take-up of the office market in London. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a picture where it probably will go to. It has a very important role to play because it's covering a need which landlords weren't willing to cover in the past because it wasn't in the interest of landlords. I mean, if you have the opportunity to enforce on your tenant that your tenant has to sign up for 15, 20 years in advance, where most corporates wouldn't even know how many desks they need in a year from now, at least we wouldn't know how many desks we need in a year from now, then you enforce that on your client, your tenant. And now somebody is coming in and is willing to take short-term commitments and is paying for the complete fit-out, which means you're moving CapEx to OpEx from a P&L perspective, which is another very favorable aspect for tenants. So on that end, that is very customer-focused, that offering. It has a flip side, obviously. How resilient is that business model? How resilient is that business model?
How resilient are they? Because they're paying out long and their income is short.
But that is only one aspect of those flex-space companies. The other aspect of those flex-space companies is that they are trying to create a different experience. You called it hospitality service, but that goes beyond. It's a completely different experience. And that whole experience topic is something which a lot of corporates are also adopting for their own premises. Because if there's one thing in common which you find everywhere, whether it's China, the US, Australia, Europe, it's this real, what we call war for talent. And it is real. And so you have to come up with real, a series of ideas, a whole concept, how you are being attractive for your future employees and for your existing employees. And your office space, the environment you put your employees in, is one critical aspect of that. And, you know, just because I was last week in China in our Shanghai office, which is by coincidence the most advanced office we have in the world, and that office is almost setting now the standard for not only for us, but for many companies, because it demonstrates very nicely how you can combine aspects of being very focused on cost control, but at the same time delivering an outstanding experience for your employees. And just to give you a bit of a metrics, we opened that office, I believe, about 15 months ago. And we had since then more than 1,300 corporates visiting that office to see that showcase and see what they should do or could do in their own premises. And when you look at our own employees, we have about 500 employees in that office, how they're embracing that office.
What the hell is it though, Christian? I mean, what have you done to make it?
It's super cool, you would enjoy it.
But it's not table football, it's got to be more than that. That was being done 20 years ago.
It's also table football. It has its own fitness room, yoga classes, but not down in the basement, right in the middle of the office. Where it's core and center to the activities. It has beautiful communal space. It has a completely superb standard of air quality, of water quality. I mean, it feels like a five-star spa with office desk in there. But I can tell you, we have reduced costs significantly compared to what we had before, because the flip side of that is you don't have your own desk. It's clean desk policy. So we only have 70% desk per employee, and that is even too generous because people work in the communal space. We have pop-up stores coming in, pop-up coffee shops coming in. Yeah. The employees are loving it. They bring their families, and no, it's only 15 months in, but what we can already see that sick days are going down. We are pretty convinced that the employee turnover will go down. So you have hard facts which measure it. And that is something which offices can do now, and that's the big change.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because as you say all of that, and certainly one really might say that what these incomers like WeWork, and it's not the only one, have done, is just show how bad the whole sector has been over the last 50 years. What have they been doing? Corridors, and then they moved to horrible open plan.
It's the question, who's driving it? If you are a landlord, and you can sign a lease for 15 years, and that is accepted by the market, why would you offer something else? Because that is giving you all the downside security. And then in London or in the UK, even worse, because rental levels or rental contracts allow upsides but no downsides. And so you put a floor into your income stream, but then you have the opportunity to raise it. So there's no incentive to change that. And when you look at it from a corporate perspective, taking up office space has been something which was usually under the control of the CFO or the procurement department. It was never under the control of the HR department. And that is now changing dramatically. You put that now under the control of HR or maybe HR and marketing. And so the aspect of, usually we were talking about rent per square feet, which is completely irrelevant. It is cost per work desk. And then ideally you combine that with other metrics like, productivity, staff turnover, sick days, and da-da-da-da-da. What you pay per rent per square feet is, it's not the point.
Very interesting. Have you got a solution to the residential problem? So that, as I see it, the residential problem is that economic activity is more concentrated in big cities. We've got lots of people in small cities and big towns, and particularly this country, post-industrial towns where they had a lot of industry, became quite big towns, but not, Barnsley, Burnley, Blackburn, Blackpool, Bury, all begin with B. Lots of these places where a lot of people live. In the north of England, the new jobs are in a handful of big cities. In the south of England, it's all, centered around London. I suspect it's not that different in new activity in Germany, and I would expect it's the same in the United States. What we've found is you can't fit all the people who want to work in the big city to live, and the big city prices are just too high to sustain the workforce. Yeah. So one option is just to build higher, but nobody, at least in this city, nobody really seems very enthusiastic about that. I don't know what you...
And by the way, it doesn't work, because if you building high means building expensive, that doesn't solve the problem, because we don't have the problem that there aren't enough apartments for people who are very affluent.
No.
The problem is there aren't enough apartments for people who have normal jobs.
Yeah.
And you won't solve that with high-rise buildings. You know, this is indeed one of the really big challenges, and it's, again, a universal challenge. You have that in all the big cities in the world. And I said that a year ago, 1.5 years ago, that I see that as the biggest threat for the Silicon Valley, because pricing in the Silicon Valley is now so outrageous that even super professional people with a top job can't live there anymore. And if you can't have housing for your employees, you can be as attractive as you want as an employer. That's something everybody needs. And if it's not available, you won't work there anymore. That's one of the reasons why the big tech companies in the US are completely spreading out. I mean, there are other reasons as well, but that is one big reason why they are spreading out. And there is no easy solution to it. I mean, you see all kinds of attempts to solve that issue. You see a lot of regulation coming into play that if you want to develop a new building, you have to bring in 30% of that development has to be social housing, in some markets 20, in other they go up to 50%. But that isn't in itself solving the problem, because at the end of the day, cost to build is going up everywhere. Capacity in many countries is too low, which is another enforcement. The ambition to build on a sustainable basis is driving cost up. And so you have a lot of cost drivers. And then you also need to understand that people who want to build need to be able to make a return on that. And so if you put all these levers on them, then it will not become attractive. I don't know what the final answer to that is. One thing I always try to promote is a little bit to widen the commutable area, because it is not in itself that everybody wants to live in central London. But you have a lot of people who would be fine to live outside of central London because they enjoy to have a bit of green, but not at the expense of 1.5 hours commuting time in the morning and 1.5 hours in the evening. So I have a strong belief that what the communities, the cities should do, they should work much harder, invest much more money on point-to-point fast transportation to widen the commutable distances. And you see that here in London with Crossrail. You will see it with a high-speed train to Birmingham, which will allow people to live in Birmingham and work in London. And you see that in Paris, but it's just at its infancy. Coming from China, obviously, with the infrastructure in China, which is super impressive. Each time you are there, they have built new roads and new railways and more infrastructure. They have actually widened the commutable space. Now, it's easier for them, so let's not go down that route, but you can see what it means if you are able to bring in that infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to open to the floor. Before we do, there are a couple of other themes I want to touch on. There's a lot to talk about. Because I want to talk about the world and where the world is. We've done property. Let's talk about the politics, because we can't avoid it. I'm going to start on a relatively technical aspect, not technical, but a relatively a niche topic, which is world trade. So it's become a very big issue, obviously. There's a trade war between China and the United States that's now well underway. One of the contentions is it's very difficult for the US, much harder for the US to sell in China than vice versa. One of the things the US would sell to China would be commercial services, of which you are a big provider. You have offices in China. Does President Trump have a point when he says companies like yours can't sell in China the way you should be able to, like they can sell, manufactured goods in the United States?
Well, our industry is not in any way facing obstacles in China. So we have 16,000 people there. We have offices all over the place, and there is nothing which is holding us back. I'm very hesitant to say that President Trump has a point on anything he says, but he probably is right that there is this is not a fair level field.
It's not symmetric.
But it is not within our industries. Obviously, in other industries, you think about the car industry now. Maybe the U.S. cars are not that popular, but if you go back to my home country, Germany, they were forced to go into joint venture structures.
Right, but were you for JLL?
We weren't forced.
So you've not had to partner with a local company?
No, because frankly speaking, the services business wasn't really where the Chinese were focused on, because there weren't much services in China. So to really understand what services is more a very recent development. We started in China in 1984, and so that is a long way back, and so I hope it will not come. I mean, I have listened to the Chinese president, what he was saying at the World Economic Forum earlier this year at Davos, where he was providing the speech you would have liked to hear from the President of the United States. And so if he sticks to that commitment, it can only get better, and it has never been difficult for us.
Right. I mean, are you worried that you could be collateral damage in a trade war? Is that a possibility, that far from helping, President Trump hurts American companies?
Can rule out nothing, but we are not important enough on that end. I'm worried that the world is taking damage. Right. And I think that is the point which should encourage all leaders, and especially also business leaders, to be loud and clear and have a voice in the US. I mean, there is nobody who can win on the back of a trade war. And funny enough, or cynical enough, the highest price will pay those people who have probably voted for the president. Because if that trade war is creating higher prices in the US, is creating inflation, people who are spending their income for consumption every month, they are suffering the most from that inflation, from those higher prices.
Is the Trump presidency, it's kind of quite interesting to watch. America's obviously become really divided and quite angrily divided. Does that affect the business in the United States? Because one of the reasons why a lot of businesses are just staying quiet about it all, I think, is because you venture up and you're going to, one side or the other, whatever you say, is going to shoot you down. And you maybe are just better off keeping your head low rather than getting into the politics.
Well, that is the interesting situation, that the general mood and the economic development in the US is brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant. It's going really strong. GDP growth is strong. I would say what's at the moment more difficult than the president is the lack of skilled people. I mean, the unemployment rate is very, very low, and the unemployment rate of highly educated people is literally zero. And so one of the impact, obviously, that whole tone has, which he has brought forward, is that you have less talented people from abroad who are interested to come to the US. When you see the applications for MBA programs in the US, even for Harvard and Stanford, the application rate went down this summer. But
so politics really does impact on the feelings people have.
If you don't feel welcome in a country, why would you go? You have choices.
Mm. Do you think, you clearly don't think Trump is a great thing. I mean,
I didn't
Brexit,
say that.
Brexit or Trump, which country made the bigger mistake in your view?
Well, I would say both are very, very, very unfortunate decisions. The fact why I would see that the Brexit decision is even more unfortunate is if you vote for a politician which you wouldn't, or if a politician has been voted in you personally don't agree with, you have a hope that this will be over after 4 years, and in the case of the US, the longest it can last is 8 years. The Brexit decision is at least a generation's decision. So for my lifetime and for your lifetime, at least for your professional lifetime and for my professional lifetime, if it really comes to a Brexit, the story is being told. I mean, that is what will be the case. And it is, from my personal point of view, a terrible decision. But obviously, I'm not a Brit, I'm a European. And I strongly believe, first of all, that the strong shoulders have to carry more weight.
Right, because I was going to say to you, do you understand the anger and discontent that led people to vote?
Sure, I do understand
change.
that, but that doesn't make it right. That explains the outcome of the vote, but that doesn't make the vote right. The UK is one of the most important countries in Europe and one of the very important countries, what we call the free Western world. And I take a very simple approach to the world. We have 7 billion people roughly living in the world. And about 1 billion, and that's a very rough estimate, have been socialized and grown up in a free democratic environment which fully respects the rule of law, which fully respects your individual will, and where you can strive just the way you like to strive. 1 to 6. It's not a great idea when this 1 billion are separating from each other. And what the UK is doing, there's in some form or fashion, they are separating from the rest of Europe. And that is now being kind of complemented by the US going down a route which may only last for 8 years, which is also not very favorable for that 1 billion people.
I think that's a good note on which to throw open to the floor. Okay, so questions, please. We're going to... I've got more if you don't have any, by the way, but we've got roving mics. I'm going to start with a woman because there is evidence that if a woman asks the first question, you get a much better gender balance of questions thereafter. Did you know that? It's actually been done. So it's very important that a woman asks the first question. So obviously, if a woman doesn't want to ask the first question, I'm not going to force anybody to. But any questions on anything? Okay, no women. Yes, we'll take one from over there. Yeah, thanks.
You were successful.
Thank you.
I thought I would
tell us who you are.
I'm Isabel Blackway-Phillips. I'm from UCL. I wondered if you could speak a bit further. You mentioned earlier the sort of decentralized nature of the company. I was wondering whether you could speak to how you feel that has come about, whether that's specific to your industry or just general technological change, and how you feel that's impacted the way that you actually work.
And that's, by the way, a great question. It's one of the things which we are very focused on. I think the history of the real estate business is exactly what was mentioned earlier by Evan, that it is a very local business. And that's why our industry and the companies which went global in our industry are so incredibly decentralized and what we would call very federated. But now we have more and more clients who are very focused on consistency of service wherever it is in the world. And so we have to get that federated nature of our organization to deliver a completely consistent service, consistent pricing, and all the aspects you would want to have for your clients. And so obviously, technology is helping us very much to do so, because if you have everybody working on the same kind of technology platform, that helps you enormously to get to that outcome. But what we all are being challenged by as global organizations is that the whole idea that the world is flat is not the reality. You have different rules across the world, which you also have to comply to and want to comply to. I mean, you all will have heard that whole, what we call Americas, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia Pacific. This is how most companies are dividing the world. I mean, I have to admit that I had to join JLL in 2005 to hear for the first time the word EMEA. I didn't even know what it is. And when you think about what we are talking about, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, there are vast differences across that geography, so that must have been an American who came up with that one. And so we are trying to kind of deliver that global consistent service in that world of differences. And again, technology is incredibly helpful. So probably fast forward 10 years, we as an organization will be significantly less federated because of the request of those clients to have that consistency.
But what is it? Is it people traveling all the time, like yourself? Or how much video conferencing are you doing? Or at a sort of practical level, how do you make it work?
Well, there is an enormous amount of travel, which is quite challenging for us because we have a very, very strong and ambitious sustainability agenda. So whenever I travel, that brings it down, and we have to do something else otherwise. You use all technology tools, video conferences, whatsoever. It's helpful when you have a very strong culture in your organization, so that the aspects of values is so ingrained in the organization that you don't have to constantly work on that one. And that is something I obviously inherited, but an organization which goes back to 1760 has created a very strong corporate culture. And that's the one thing, whether I'm in Mumbai or in Sydney or in China or in Belgium, I immediately identify a JLL office as a JLL office even before I see the sign. It's JLL. You come in and you immediately feel these are JLL people. I can identify them in an elevator in a high-rise building. And it sounds a bit odd, but there is something in it that the corporate culture, the values we have in our organization is creating a situation that those people will hire people who fit into that environment. And that has nothing to do with a lack of diversity. We are a very diverse organization, but also in a very diverse organization, you can share these values of ethics, teamwork, and collaboration.
Another question. Yes, take the gentleman over there.
Hi. Well, I'm Albano. I work for Manjilji. The question that I have is especially on the productivity side, right? Great office, yoga, it seems everything amazing, but are people actually working, or they spend more of their time playing ping pong and doing yoga classes?
Well, this is a very real question, and I was recently in our new office in the Netherlands, which is also pretty cool. And they established that office, and a couple of months later, they got a new country manager. And they had that football table right in the middle of the office, and he didn't like it. He said, this is sending the wrong message, because imagine you have clients coming in and during the day you're playing table football here. I would say people who have been blessed with a great education and who are working in a professional environment which is challenging them and which is offering interesting work, they tend to work because they enjoy it. And if people are hiding and not working, it's not only the fault of the people, it's also the fault of the company who is not able to offer interesting work to those people. So I'm very relaxed about that topic, whether people have a yoga course in the middle of the day. I'm pretty convinced that they will do their work. They do it later, then they work until 8 o'clock, because in between.
If they weren't doing yoga, they'd be on Facebook or something. They wouldn't be working.
I think that is more risky.
That's where the productivity leakage
people are on their Facebook account.
Because they're embarrassed about seeing to be playing football all day, where no one knows whether they're working or just writing emails or online shopping. And the
not that we do that, but as you know, the opportunity of technology offers also that you see very easily what people are doing, because when they haven't used their computer for 2 hours other than being on the Facebook side, then you know they haven't been working.
And you're already using those metrics?
No, as I said, we
They're
are
not doing it.
We are not doing it. And in Europe, you know, not so much in the UK, but for example, in my home country, you're not allowed to monitor any of those things. In China, we would probably be allowed, but we don't do it.
No, it's a good point. Okay, we've got a couple over here. We'll take the lady here and then the gentleman here. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, Ellen Comber, Global Female Leaders, and I'm also a member of Chatham House. I would like to hear a little bit about JLL's commitment to renewable energy, and if that is something that you're following your clients' demands, or is it an active strategy from JFL concerning their service buildings?
Well, it used to be an active strategy of JLL. It still is, but fortunately, it has now turned into a very strong client demand. I mean, that whole topic of sustainability, and we don't have to argue whether we have climate change. I mean, we have climate change, but where it's coming from, people may have different opinions, but that whole topic has become increasingly important and is on the agenda. And we started off, I think in 2012, we gave ourselves targets on the environmental aspects of sustainability, and we started even earlier to have a service around environmental advisory to our clients. And it was for many years more of a push, and clients will say that's interesting, but we're not going to pay for it, and so on and so on. But that has changed dramatically. I mean, going back to this year's World Economic Forum, I have never attended a World Economic Forum where so many big CEOs from much more important companies than JLL have given public commitments about what they want to achieve with regards to the reduction of their carbon footprint over the next 5, 10, 15 years, whatever they were chosen. The good thing for me when I was listening to that was not only that I was very happy that they were giving that commitment, I knew that that would bring business for us, because 40% of the carbon footprint is coming from buildings. And on the back of that, they will not be able to deliver on those publicly stated targets if they don't touch their real estate footprint massively. And so for us, it has now become both ways. We are pushing it to the clients. Clients are coming to us and asking us for advice. And for ourselves, I can say that we met our own targets, which we had given us in 2012, and we wanted to reach until 2020, already at the end of 2017. So we were not ambitious enough, so we are now setting new, more ambitious targets going forward.
What can you do with a building? Take this building. I mean, if we asked you to come in and make it more environmentally sustainable, what sort of difference is achievable normally? 10%, 20%, 30%? What?
You know, there's almost no limit. As you know, you have carbon plus buildings, so they are taking, or energy, I should say, energy plus buildings. They are taking more energy from the building than they're actually consuming in the building. This is frankly quite normal for newly built residential in Germany. You have a lot of energy plus buildings now. But if you bring it into an office building, you can have energy plus buildings.
And that's not by offsetting somewhere in planting a forest somewhere else.
No. That is too easy. I mean, the building in itself, I mean, you can have solar panels in the facade, you can have solar panels on the roof, you can get the water from rain. I mean, there are many, many ways how you can make an energy plus building. And it costs money, but you know, it has a massive, massive impact on your carbon footprint. And you can do a lot with existing buildings. I mean, think about all these old buildings here in London, most of the windows are just not up to standard. And there's a lot of energy being wasted, and now it's also wasted in the summer, because as the summers are becoming much more warmer, you start to have air conditions in many, many buildings, which is really, really bad on the energy consumption. So this is, I mean, 40%. I mean, this is massive. We're only talking about cars and coal plants and those things. 40% is coming from buildings.
Mm. Yep, take the gentleman here. Yep.
Hi, my name is Hassan. I'm from Koch Holding. I was just wondering to what extent you're ready for the industrial revolution, or that's what they call like artificial intelligence, automation. People talking about that there will be less workers and more artificial intelligence and automation.
This is really, I'm glad you raised this, because I suppose in a way it's the long-term vision for society, cities, and work, and how technology changes that. We do work less than we used to. I mean, everybody thinks they work much harder than people used to work in the past, but actually the weekend, I think, is only about 100 years old as a concept. I mean, people used to work 6-day weeks, and they used to work longer hours. So we do work less. Still, people tend to think work is not going to disappear because we'll find something to do if we have to. Or maybe we'll just play table football and do online shopping at calling it work. But where are you on that long term?
Well, he asked me at the beginning whether I'm concerned about the resilience of JLL in a downward cycle, which I'm not concerned about, but I'm concerned about that topic. This is a big topic. And it is a big topic from many different angles. First of all, if you see the need to change your organization and bring your organization really into the digital age, it is quite hard to create a sense of urgency if your organization is successful. Now, I don't want my organization to be not successful, but that is the flip side of the success which we had over the last decades, that it's that sense of urgency to change and to really embrace the need to become a technology company focusing on real estate services. And that's the journey we are on. And so our traditional competitors, I always call friends because they have the same challenge than we have, as we have. Our non-traditional competitors, and unfortunately I can't identify them because most of them are still not visible who will be our competitors, they are the ones who are really a danger to us. And I can give you a quick example. When I was last week in China, I was told that there's a company, and I won't name the company now, but it's a company which is very active in the whole online logistics area, has become a valuer for industrial sites because they have now all the data of all the logistics centers in China because that's their core business, and they have now turned that data and used it for valuations. Now, we are, with one peer, the biggest valuer of real estate in the world. And so we have always been very focused on who kind of can challenge us in that business line. We wouldn't have come up with that company. And that is something which is a real challenge. And when you think about the broadness of our services and the broadness of our geography, it's very hard to fight back because that is a challenge on one service and one particular asset class in China. The challenge in Australia may be very different, in India, in the Middle East, they're all different challenges. So what you have to do, you have to become incredibly focused on what are your clients you're really targeting, what are the type of services which they really need from you, and then you have to be excellent in digitizing those servicing, bringing the technology in, and you have to be ruthless on that journey. And you have to accept that existing traditional services will disappear. You won't offer that anymore because you have to focus your spend on those areas which are really important for the future.
You're investing in prop tech, as they call it, some of these. You've got your own venture fund.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, we are investing massively into technology and also into prop tech. So prop tech is like fintech, prop tech for the property industry. To create that sense of urgency, we started with two Silicon Valley guys some time back, a new company which we call JLL Spark. And JLL Spark is focused on identifying the next big thing in property, but digitally driven. And we started that on that basis, but then we saw how much money is flowing into that prop tech world, and the skill set and the talent of people who were becoming startup entrepreneurs was moving up very, very fast. And so we saw that is not good enough, and then we put as an addition a venture capital fund in, so we are now investing into some of those startups. And we are using, obviously, our knowledge of real estate, but what they find more interesting, our access to clients. Because if you have a great PropTech startup, maybe brilliant, but how do you get to the client? And even if you get to the client, they will say, who are you? Whereas when we get to the client and say, this is a great product, we JLL believe that this is the next big thing, then that's much easier to get that deployed by the clients. So that is one way, and it was one way to create the urgency in our organization, because then the 86,000 were seeing these few people in the Silicon Valley who were doing that thing. That was pretty cool, and then they were saying, oh, what are we doing there? I want to be part of that, and that created a lot of urgency. And now, when I did the town hall meeting last week in Shanghai with our 500 people there, I would say 80% of the questions I received in the town hall meeting was around technology. Whereas you go 2 years back, 80% of the questions would have been around other topics.
Right, so I might have misunderstood the question, but there's another question which you didn't answer, which is
wasn't
not
raised yet.
No, but it's actually what I'd interpreted the question as being. So I'll put it, which is not about how you use technology to
You
displace,
mean how
but
technology
it's
is taking...
how technology is going to change our use of property. How we are. This is the kind of the vision view of the vision thing for offices, commercial space in the future. Are as many of us going to be working? Are we going to need this? Is it going to be different kinds of offices? We've already replaced a lot of shops with logistics centres. That's what we've basically done. They're very different to shops, logistics centres. They have goods, but they don't need to make them look nice. And are we going to get? Is something like that going to happen when our jobs are displaced by machines or robots? Or
Well, this is a wide question, and it needs different angles of answering. If you are wondering whether people would still come to an office because technology allows them to work remotely, I would give you a very strong yes, they will. Yeah. Because the human interaction has become even more important because of all that technology. And so I think people will still come to office, but they expect a different office environment, and we touched on that earlier. If the question is, how do we use property? Well, property will become much more an experience. It will become much more convenient. I feel hot here on stage. So in the future, I would get my phone out and I will be able to regulate the temperature where I sit. Now, I could probably also regulate the light, but you wouldn't want that because then I would sit in the dark. But those type of things are, I mean, I was in a meeting the last 2 days in a meeting room here in London, and that meeting room was really damn cold. And you had people in the room who thought that was the right temperature, and they took their jacket off. And we had some people in the room who were asking for a sweater because they were freezing. I mean, this is not convenient. And if you now, in one meeting room that's difficult, you still will have to agree. But if you have office space, you can kind of direct the light, the temperature, you can order your food, you can order your meeting room. I mean, there will all kinds of experience apps which you will be able to use. So that's another aspect of how we use technology. When you take it more from a landlord point of view or employer point of view, you will know how your office is being used. So going back to our Shanghai office, we have sensors in that whole office. So I told you we have only 70% desks for the employees. But we know that these are way too many desks because we're currently sitting at about a 52% usage. We know that because we have sensors at those desks. We know exactly which areas of this office is being popular and which areas of this office is not so popular. And that will completely educate the owners of buildings what works and what doesn't work. How can I make that building more productive and how can I improve? The last aspect I think you touched on is AI. I got that question last week as well. People were worried whether they will still have a job. Now, I don't know the precise outcome. My current instinct is that AI will allow us to drop boring, repetitive work to a computer, and it will allow us to focus on the work where you have to be more creative, more entrepreneurial, and you really have to use all those human skill sets which we are gifted with. The challenge is we need to invest in the education of our people. I came from a world where I kind of took my education and my university education, and at the time when you left university, you thought you are done. Now you're educated for your work life, and that is history, because when I took my university education, we didn't even use any PCs. And so I went back to Stanford a couple of years ago and did executive classes at Stanford, which educated me on what's going on in the technology world. One reason why I'm so focused on that whole technology thing is I realized what's going on there. And so that is what we have to do at scale. I take next year the top 120 people of our organization and I drag them into Stanford and get them a condensed version what I received there, because they need to understand what is going on around technology. And we have to do that. We can't bring everybody to Stanford, but we have to constantly educate our staff so that they are fit for purpose in that new world of AI.
I think that's a very good. Oh, we've got a couple more. I'll tell you what, we can run one. We'll take one more question. We'll take the one from this gentleman. Yeah, that was a good point to finish, but this might be an even better.
Hi,
question.
my name is Shoaib. I run my own strategy company from a geopolitical intelligence perspective. My question is around the corporate culture. We talk a lot about tone at the top. The current sort of a corporate culture we see either from America or all the 5 major financial hubs, Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, London, New York, is pretty much dominated by the US or British or the Europe. And you talked a lot about the China, the upcoming China corporate culture. So how you see the corporate culture changing in the next sort of 10, 15 years? Because I assume the Chinese corporate culture is pretty different from the corporate culture we have right now around the world.
Is whether the Chinese culture might come this way as opposed to ours going over there. Is that?
Yeah, that's sort of so how you see the two differences and how you see the world from the corporate culture perspective in the next 10 years' time.
Yeah, okay, that is a good one on which to finish. So this is your last one.
Well, I mean, clearly diversity is key for success, and diversity in its full broadness. When we started to talk the word diversity, we were talking about gender diversity, and now we know that we are talking the full scope of diversity and inclusiveness. And I can only talk about my own experience here. When you look at our board of directors, we have a Chinese national, we have an Indian national, we have people from Europe, we have people from the US, we have completely different skill sets. And I can't tell you how much I benefit as the CEO of this company from those skill sets. So whatever topic I have to address, if it's really complicated, I reach out to one of my board members because they have that diversity of knowledge and backgrounds. We have that on that board. And the same applies to our own organization. So I think that is of utmost importance. And that's why and I don't want to end actually on a political note, but that's why it is so terrible that we currently have leaders in the world who think that they can say, my country first, and it's either my way or highway. That is sending the complete wrong message in the world. It is demotivating and disencouraging for people and for young people who are getting into business. And we have to really kind of counter that.
Okay. That is a good point at which to finish, I think. There are drinks upstairs, but before we do, go and have a glass of wine. Let's thank Christian for some really interesting things.